Chapter 405. When Lu Yi and Shi Guanggang fought for a while, the latter was slightly stronger. However, Lu Yi could activate all kinds of spirit inscriptions during the battle, especially the defensive spirit inscriptions, which helped him block a few fatal threats. That was why the two sides could fight so fiercely. But as time passed, the blood-stained spirit tattoos gradually took effect, and Lu Ye's strength increased bit by bit, slowly surpassing Shi Guang. The blood-stained spirit tattoos continued to take effect, and Lu Ye's strength continued to increase. At this point, Shi Guang was at a disadvantage every time they fought. Shi Guang was furious. Although swallowing a chi explosion pill could increase a cultivator's strength for a short time, it had very strong aftereffects. Moreover, when the chi explosion pill took effect, the cultivator's mind would also be affected, making them more prone to anger. Under normal circumstances, Shi Guang should have noticed the growing gap in strength between him and Lu Yi, but now he was completely blinded by anger. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to kill this opponent in front of him. Climbing up from the ground, Shi Guang turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. He narrowed his swollen eyes and looked at Lu Yi, who was rushing towards him. He raised the spear in his hand slightly and assumed an extremely strange posture. The next moment, all his spirit energy poured into the spear like a flood. Lu Yi, who was rushing forward, felt all the hair on his body stand on end. A strong sense of danger grew in his heart, and he immediately understood that Shi Guang was about to use some powerful secret technique. After a brief consideration, Lu Yi did not retreat. He also urged his spirit energy to pour into the mountain pan saber, and the long saber, which was already wrapped in flames, burned completely. Boom. The eruption of spirit energy from both sides caused the space in the entire battlefield to distort, and countless cyclones of various sizes swam around. Hoopa was forced to the edge of the battlefield by the violent power. His small body was pressed against the ground, and he did not move. The two figures rushed at each other at an extremely fast speed. Shi Guang pulled out his spear and shouted, "Prairie fire!" A spear shadow appeared in Lu Ye's field of vision, but the spear shadow was like a prairie fire, quickly spreading out. In an instant, Lu Ye's field of vision was filled with countless spear shadows. He didn't care. Instead, he used all his strength to slash down with his burning saber. The spear shadows that filled the sky were shattered into nothingness. The Pan Mountain blade felt as if it had cut through flesh. At the same time, Lu Yi felt a chill in his chest. The tide of spiritual energy slowly subsided, and the two people in the field were still in a deadlock. As far as the eye could see, Lu Ye's Panshan saber had struck Shi Guang's shoulder blade, almost decapitating him. Meanwhile, Shi Guang's spear had pierced through Lu Ye's chest and exited from his back. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Fresh blood dripped down, making a clear sound. The two of them stared at each other with bloodshot eyes, and then simultaneously raised their legs to kick each other. With a loud bang, both of them were knocked off balance by the recoil and staggered backwards. Lu Ye's chest was bleeding profusely, while Shi Guang's neck was also spurting blood like a fountain. Ding! Lu Ye's long saber stabbed into the ground, but Shi Guang couldn't hold on any longer. With a plop, he fell to the ground, his aura weakening at a speed visible to the naked eye. The time limit of the chi eruption pill was up. The powerful recoil caused his expression to contort, and an indescribable pain swept through his body. At this moment, he no longer had the strength to continue fighting. Lu Yi gasped for breath, barely managing to stand up, and walked step by step towards Shi Guang. Shi Guang's swollen eyes were fixed on the sky above the battlefield, his thoughts unknown. It wasn't until he heard Lu Ye's movements that his lips moved, about to speak. Roar! Hoopa roared. However, this didn't stop Shi Guang. Since he already knew Hoopa's ability, how could Shi Guang not have taken precautions before entering? Under the impact of Hoopa's howl, Shi Guang's body was suddenly enveloped by an invisible barrier, isolating him from the impact of the howl. "I admit defeat." Shi Guang spat out these two words, his entire body completely relaxed, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Shi Guang's silhouette vanished without a trace. Lu Yi stopped in his tracks. Yi revealed herself and hurriedly supported him. Looking at the wound on Lu Ye's chest, her face was filled with lingering fear. If that spear had been slightly off target, Lu Yi would have died. In fact, Shi Guang's spear had indeed been aimed at Lu Ye's heart, but Lu Yi had avoided it at the critical moment. After a short while, Lu Yi was lying on the bed in the wooden hut. Hua Xi was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands surging with pure wood-type spiritual energy to treat his injuries. Before Hua Xi could finish treating him, Lu Yi had already fallen into a deep sleep. It was undeniable that the battle with Shi Guang was the most satisfying battle he had had since challenging the Spirit Stream list. The anger that had accumulated in his heart due to Ghost Shadow and the others had been completely vented. Although his opponent's methods weren't too honorable, as he had taken the Qi Eruption pill in advance, they were still enemies. Naturally, he would do anything to win. Who cared about honorable or not? Lu Yi didn't want to think about anything else. He just wanted to have a good sleep. While he was sleeping, the cultivators of the two camps on the Spirit Stream battlefield had completely different attitudes. The change in the Spirit Stream list was immediately noticed by the cultivators. When the first and third positions were exchanged, the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance were all overjoyed. Their spirits were lifted, and they felt honored. On the other hand, the cultivators of the Myriad Devil Ridge were deathly silent. Their hearts were filled with gloom. The thing they were most worried about had finally happened. Lu Ye of the Jade Blood Sect had defeated Shi Guang with his Heaven 8 cultivation base and reached the Spirit Stream list. Such a feat had broken all the records of the 9 continents cultivation world over the years. Before this, there had never been a precedent of a Heaven 8 cultivator occupying the Spirit Stream list. Take Li Baxian for example. He had been in the Spirit Stream stage for more than 10 years, but had only occupied the top 10. Later, after his battle with Yan Xing and revealing his true strength, he had only reached 3rd place. Although the Spirit Stream list's value had decreased greatly after the 3 malignant names had disappeared, the 1st place was still the 1st place. Among the 100 people on the Spirit Stream list, only a Heaven 8 cultivator was at the top, while the rest were all Heaven 9 cultivators. This was a scene that was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. Furthermore, when Lu Ye had first entered the Spirit Stream list, he had been ranked 33rd with his Heaven 7 cultivation base. This was also something that had never happened before. Apart from him, no one had ever entered the Spirit Stream list with a Heaven 7 cultivation base, let alone being ranked so high. Cultivation base aside, the speed at which he had climbed the list was astonishing. Since he had started to focus on the list, less than half a month had passed. During this time, he had spent 5 days competing with Bai Lan and the other cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge who had challenged him. In other words, he had only spent about 10 days on the list. In 10 days, he had been invincible all the way to the 1st place of the Spirit Stream list. This was simply shocking. The cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge felt bitter. Was the era of being dominated by one person about to come again? Previously, when this guy had been in the inner circle, he had caused the people of the Myriad Devil Ridge to panic. However, at that time, he had only relied on his own attainments in the Tao of Formations to form the Grand Heaven Alliance. Now, he was relying on his true strength. The two types of threats were completely different. There was no doubt that the current Lu Yi was more terrifying than when he had been in the inner circle. The only thing that the Myriad Devil Ridge could rejoice about was the news from Shi Guang that Lu Yi had been seriously injured in the last battle. He would need a long time to recuperate. Therefore, the Myriad Devil Ridge did not have to worry about him jumping out and causing trouble in the short term. Under normal circumstances, the Myriad Devil Ridge could take this opportunity to challenge Lu Yi and pull him down from the 1st place of the Spirit Stream list. However, looking at the current Spirit Stream list, only 2 of the top 6 were from the Myriad Devil Ridge. One was Shi Guang, and the other was the female archer. Only the 2 of them were qualified to challenge Lu Yi. Shi Guang was seriously injured, and with the aftereffects of the explosive pill, he would be bedridden for at least half a month. It would be good enough if he could maintain his ranking. How could he have the strength to challenge Lu Yi? As for the female archer, she had used up all her arrows. If she wanted to replenish them, it would take a few days. A few days was enough for Lu Yi to recover. Therefore, unless someone from the Grand Heaven Alliance challenged Lu Ye's position on the list would be unshakable. Naturally, the people from the Grand Heaven Alliance were not stupid enough to do something that would make their enemies happy. However, the Myriad Devil Ridge was indeed planning to do so. After Lu Yi reached the top of the Spirit Stream list, the cultivators from the Grand Heaven Alliance in the top 6 were constantly challenged by the cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge. The Myriad Devil Ridge clearly wanted to use these people's rankings as a springboard to challenge Lu Yi. As long as they could defeat these cultivators from the Grand Heaven Alliance and replace their positions, they would be qualified to challenge Lu Yi. Once they could challenge Lu Yi, given his current condition, there was a high chance that he would not be able to win. Inside the wooden house, Lu Yi woke up with a clear pain in his chest and left arm. He did not have much strength in his body. He slowly got up and yawned. Yi was standing guard beside him. When she heard the noise, she quickly stood up and placed a pillow behind Lu Yi. She asked with concern, "How do you feel?" "I'm fine." Lu Yi rubbed his stomach. "I'm a little hungry. Can I get something to eat?" He smelled a fragrance coming from outside the window. Unsurprisingly, it was Hua Ci cooking. Everyone from the Jade Blood sect seemed to have this advantage. All of them were good at cooking. Second senior sister was like this, fourth senior brother was like this, and Hua Ci was also like this. "Wait a minute." Yi floated out of the window. After a while, she came back with a bowl of porridge. He did not know what was in the porridge, but it looked very colorful. Lu Yi drank the porridge while checking the various messages in his battlefield imprint. He chose to reply to some of them. Most of them were congratulatory messages. Lu Ye's cultivation was at the 8th heaven, so he had suppressed everyone and occupied the top spot of the Spirit Stream list. Naturally, it was worth celebrating. Chapter 406. There were also some messages that invited him to cultivate in their sections. They weren't trying to curry favor with Lu Yi. Lu Yi was now in a lot of trouble, especially now that he was first on the Spirit Stream list. The Myriad Demon Ridge was even more determined to kill him. No matter which sect he went to cultivate in, he wouldn't bring much benefit to them. The only possibility was that he would be targeted by the Myriad Demon Ridge. Lu Yi naturally refused all of these invitations. The 10,000 Poison Forest was the best place for him to hide. As long as he didn't show himself, the people from the Myriad Devil Ridge wouldn't be able to find him. He could take the initiative to attack at any time and catch the Myriad Devil Ridge off guard. Although the world energy here wasn't too rich, as long as Lu Yi had enough spirit pills, his cultivation speed wouldn't be too slow. After ending the message, Lu Yi focused on eating his porridge. Hua Ci came every day to treat his injuries. In just 3 days, Lu Ye's injuries were mostly healed. In his spare time, he cultivated and read. His days suddenly became leisurely without all the previous disturbances. Lu Yi was surprised to find that he was quite comfortable with this kind of life and even liked it. It wasn't until now that he realized that deep down, he wasn't someone who liked to cause trouble. Compared to that kind of thrilling life, he preferred peace and quiet. It was just that, people in Jianghu had no choice. In the small courtyard outside the wooden house, Lu Yi held the mountain pan saber. The spirit chi around him surged and crazily poured into the saber. Some time ago, he was invincible in the Spirit Stream list, but in the battle with Shiguang, he found that he was facing a problem. He lacked a way to make the final decision. It could also be said that it was a trump card. The Fire Phoenix Spirit Tattoo was one of them, but it was difficult for him to activate it with his current strength. Last time, he had been able to activate it because he had made a lot of preparations in advance. Moreover, the aftereffects of activating the Fire Phoenix Spirit Tattoo were too great. At that time, he had been lying in bed for many days under Hua Ci's care. What he needed now was a trump card that he could withstand and use. Shiguang's last spear strike had given him a lot of inspiration. He also remembered the scene when he went to the Pill Heart sect and fought with a Heavenly Nine-Sword cultivator. From beginning to end, his opponent had only used one sword strike, but that sword strike contained all of his strength. It was similar to Shiguang's last spear strike, which was a blow that contained a large amount of spirit chi. This method was not difficult to use. At the last moment of his battle with Shiguang, Lu Yi had actually grasped the essence of this technique, which was why he had been able to block his opponent's blazing spear. What he needed to do now was to familiarize himself with this technique and perfect it so that he could use it at any time when facing an enemy. Flames blazed as the saber burned. The Mount Pan saber hummed as Lu Yi slashed down. The space in front of him seemed to be torn apart, and a crack appeared on the ground. He did not activate the sharpness spirit tattoo, but the power of this strike was much greater than before. Lu Yi frowned. He was not very satisfied with this strike because it consumed a lot of spirit chi and physical strength. Moreover, his right arm felt a little sore after this strike. He could at most make 3 strikes in a short period of time before his right arm could not be raised. If this happened in a battle with a strong opponent, he would not be far from defeat. Although he was not satisfied, he had just started cultivating and there were many areas that could be improved. This was a technique and a saber technique. Since it was a saber technique, it should have its own name. How to name it was a problem, Lu Yi muttered to himself. He recalled the flash of sharpness when the saber fell and an idea came to him. Let's call it Flash. There was no shortcut to practicing saber techniques other than perseverance and diligence. In the small courtyard, Lu Yi would occasionally pick up the mountain saber to practice. Then he would take some spirit pills to recover. When the soreness in his right arm disappeared, he would continue practicing. Although doing so would slow down his cultivation progress, for Lu Yi, the level of his cultivation base was never the most important thing. The fact that he had been able to reach the top of the spirit stream list with his Heaven 8 cultivation base had undoubtedly proved that point. If he could cultivate the flash to the point where he could use it as he wished, then slowing down his cultivation speed would be worth it. Days passed, and Lu Yi gradually became more and more familiar with the flash. However, he was still unable to solve the problem of the consumption of his saber technique. Such an imperfect saber technique would be very difficult to use against strong opponents. Lu Yi never thought that he would have no opponents after reaching first place on the spirit stream list. He would also advance to the Cloud River battlefield. The situation in the Cloud River battlefield was much more complicated than the Spirit Stream battlefield. Even if he could do as he pleased in the Spirit Stream battlefield, he would still have to be careful in the Cloud River battlefield. Over the past few days, several experts from the Grand Heaven Alliance had been steadily maintaining their rankings on the Spirit Stream list. Aside from Shi Guang, who had taken second place on the Spirit Stream list, only the female archer had moved to fourth place. The rankings of the others had not changed much. As for Lu Yi, no one had come to challenge him. Whether it was Shi Guang or the female archer, they all knew that they were no match for Lu Yi. Naturally, they would not come looking for trouble. Half a month later, Lu Yi had opened 320 apertures. It had been 40 days since he had reached Heaven 8. Previously, he had been busy trying to reach the Spirit Stream list, so he had not had much time to cultivate. Recently, he had been practicing saber techniques, which had slowed down his cultivation speed. So, despite so many days, he had only opened 20 apertures. He was still 40 apertures away from reaching Heaven 9. Lu Yi, who was practicing saber techniques in the small courtyard, suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. Heaven's will had descended. It had been 30 days since he had re-entered the Spirit Stream list. It was time for the heavenly will to reward him. Over the past few days, he had not left the wooden house. It could be said that he had been waiting for this day to come. Regarding the Spirit Stream list experts being rewarded by the heavenly will, he had asked many people to inquire about the situation. So, even if it was his first time experiencing it, he knew what would happen next. Now, he was only worried about one thing, and that was whether or not Hupereni would be rewarded with him. However, when he thought about it carefully, Hupo was his pet beast, which was recognized by the heavenly will. He was also Hupo's nightmare spirit. When he had challenged the Spirit Stream list, the two of them had participated in every battle. Now that it was time for the rewards, they should not be left behind. Just as he was thinking about it, Yi and Hupa ran out of the wooden house. Lu Yi, I feel like I've sensed something. Fubu. Yi felt something for the first time, so she could not help but feel a little confused. Just don't resist, Lu Yi said. Hua Si heard the commotion and came out. Their eyes met, and she quickly understood. It's time? Lu Yi nodded. After saying that, Lu Yi, Hu Pe, and Yi's figures quickly faded away and disappeared. In a misty area, the three figures that had disappeared suddenly reappeared. This was the place where the Heavenly Will rewards were given out, the Heavenly Will Pool. The mist in the pool was not spiritual chi of heaven and earth, but a type of energy that was extremely useful to cultivators. Absorbing and refining the mist could not only temper a cultivator's body, but also increase the strength of a cultivator's soul. It could also purify the accumulated pill toxins in the body and increase the purity of one's spiritual power. There were many other benefits. Every expert on the Spirit Stream list who could stay on the list for a month would be drawn here by the Heavenly Will, where they would receive the baptism of the Heavenly Will rewards and become even more powerful. Even if they had the opportunity to enter again, refining the spiritual mist would not benefit them much. In the past, there had been rumors that Feng Yuechen, Li Baxian, and Yan Xing, the three malignant tumors, had occupied the Spirit Stream list for too long and had been disliked by the Heavenly Will. Therefore, after the first few times, the monthly baptisms were not given to them. In truth, it was not that the Heavenly Will disliked them, but rather that the spiritual mist had no effect on them. That was why the Heavenly Will not lead them here. Within the Heavenly Will pool, Lu Yi turned to look around and found Hu Pe and Yi by his side. Chapter 407. Without needing Lu Ye's instructions, Yi immediately entered a state of meditation. The light on her body flickered, and as the light changed, the surrounding spirit mist continuously poured into her body. Hu Pe was even more direct. He revealed his true form, opened his bloody mouth, and sucked in. The spirit mist visible to the naked eye turned into a stream of air and was sucked into his stomach. Although it was the first time they were drawn here by Heaven's secret, they all knew that time was limited. Even if Lu Yi was ranked first, he wouldn't stay here for more than an hour. Moreover, this was an opportunity that only came once a month, so they naturally had to cherish it. Lu Yi began to construct spirit-gathering runes in his spiritual cavities. He had experienced something similar twice before. The first time was in the 100 Peak Mountains Dragon Spring, and the second time was in the Immortal Essence City's soul cleansing pool. In such an environment, his method could be used to great effect. With Lu Ye's speed and concentration in constructing spiritual tattoos, it only took him a moment to complete all 320 small spirit-gathering funnels. He didn't need to worry about what would happen next. These small funnels would naturally draw the surrounding spirit mist into Lu Ye's body and transform it through his own spirit energy. A warm feeling flowed through his body. The effects of the spirit mist here were indeed extraordinary. Lu Yi could feel his body and mind gradually growing stronger. However, if he really wanted to compare, the spirit mist here couldn't compare to directly devouring the blood veins in the scale armor. In terms of strengthening the mind and soul, it couldn't compare to the Immortal Essence City's soul cleansing pool. As for increasing the purity of his spirit energy, Lu Yi couldn't feel it, because his spirit energy had always been pure and flawless. Overall, the spirit mist of this Heaven's Secret pool was like a weakened version of the combination of the Dragon Spring and the soul cleansing pool. However, this didn't mean that it was useless to Lu Yi. On the contrary, it was very useful. Because devouring the blood veins in the scale armor was a very violent process, Lu Yi didn't dare to directly devour them in the beginning. Every time Hu Pe devoured them, he would be like a corpse for a while. Only when the man and tiger grew stronger could they bear it. Moreover, the blood veins in the scale armor had been completely depleted. In the past, Lu Yi had thought that the scale armor contained an abundance of blood veins, but as he and Hu Pe continued to use it, and later used it on the giant armor, the scale armor had completely lost its function. The scale armor was now just a simple decoration. The spirit mist of the Heaven Fate Pond was a very gentle enhancement to one's physique and mind. It wouldn't make one feel uncomfortable. Immersing oneself in it, one's entire body would relax, and one might even feel like sleeping. After constructing small spirit-gathering funnels in his spiritual cavities, Lu Yi took out several formation flags and scattered them in all directions, setting up a spirit-gathering formation in the middle of the Heavenly Fate Pond to increase the speed of gathering spiritual fog. The effect was obvious. The mist in the pool became thicker. He still hadn't stopped. With his experience in the Immortal Essence City's soul-cleansing pool, he really wanted to know if he could do something similar and condense the spiritual fog here into liquid and bring it out. It should be possible to observe the density of the spiritual mist in the pool. Lu Yi hurriedly activated his spirit energy and constructed a huge spirit-gathering rune. He then controlled it to turn it into a large funnel. Everything went smoothly. The dense spiritual fog was drawn over and gathered in the funnel. It then clung to the walls of the funnel, condensed into liquid, and flowed out from the bottom of the funnel. Lu Yi took out a jade bottle and placed it at the funnel, ready to collect the dripping spiritual liquid. However, at this moment, an invisible force swept over and destroyed the large funnel in an instant. Lu Yi frowned. Unwilling to give up, he activated his spirit energy to construct another large funnel. This time, as soon as the large funnel was formed, the invisible force appeared again and destroyed the funnel. Not only that, but Lu Yi also had a feeling that he was being watched. It was as if a pair of eyes were staring at him in the dark. If he did anything wrong, there would definitely be some unpleasant consequences. Was this the heavenly fate? Lu Ye's heart trembled. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation, he often heard the term heavenly fate. The daily cultivation life of a cultivator was inseparable from the heavenly fate. He had always thought that the so-called heavenly fate was just some strange rules or laws that were above all living things. However, now it seemed that he was wrong. This heavenly fate was alive? His body became somewhat stiff, and the feeling of impending doom was very bad. Lu Yi activated his spirit energy and tried to construct a large spiritual funnel. However, as soon as it took shape, he felt an indescribable panic in his heart. Inside his chest, his heart thumped, as if it was going to jump out of his throat. After dispersing his spirit energy, the panic disappeared. Lu Yi immediately confirmed that the heavenly fate did not allow him to bring the spiritual fog out. That was why it had warned him. Was it necessary? However, after thinking about it, the spiritual fog was a reward given by the heavenly fate to the experts on the spirit stream list. Only those who had been on the list for a month were qualified to be drawn here. If he brought the spiritual fog out, what kind of reward would it be? It was like going to a banquet. Being able to eat as much as you wanted was a skill, but taking it away was not right. Realizing this, Lu Yi gave up on his previous idea. Although it was a pity, since the heavenly fate did not allow it, there was nothing he could do. He could not fight the heavenly fate with his wits and courage. In the end, he would be the one to suffer. What he was most concerned about was whether or not the heavenly fate had its own consciousness. Or was it really a living thing? Suppressing the doubts in his heart, Lu Yi found a place to sit down and wait. Other people cultivated by concealing their spirit and qi, concentrating their mind without any distracting thoughts. After all, if they were not focused enough, they would not be able to absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. However, Lu Yi cultivated by himself. As long as the small spiritual funnel was still there, he did not need to worry. As he silently comprehended, his body and mind continued to grow stronger. Lu Yi had never felt time pass so quickly. His vision blurred, and the environment he was in changed from the heavenly fate pond to the small wooden house. Only then did Lu Yi realize that an hour had already passed. Checking his body, Lu Yi found that even though his body and mind were already strong enough, staying in the heavenly fate pond for an hour had greatly increased his strength. Conservatively speaking, his body and mind had increased by at least 10%. This kind of increase did not seem like much, only 10%, but it was actually very terrifying. Because Lu Ye's foundation was already very strong, an increase of 10% on top of his already strong foundation would naturally bring about a great increase in strength. Other things aside, if he were to fight with Shiguang now, he was confident that he could defeat him without getting injured. Of course, this was related to the methods he used. Others who entered focused on absorbing spiritual qi, so no matter how talented they were, their efficiency would not be very high. But he was different. Not only did he have more than 300 small funnel spirit patterns to strengthen his spiritual cavities, he also set up a spiritual qi gathering formation. Not only did he obtain enough benefits from inside, even Yi and Hupa benefited from it. Lu Yi, you seem to have turned white? Yi seemed to have discovered a new continent and looked at Lu Yi with interest. Nonsense. Lu Ye's face darkened, and he raised his hand to pinch Yi's face. Yes, it feels better than before. Lu Yi suspected that if she continued to cultivate like this, Yi would become no different from a living person. Although she looked no different from other people, she was still just a spirit body. Being pinched by Lu Yi, Yi could not break free and could only cry for help. Big sister Hua Xiai, save me. Hearing the commotion, Hua Xiai walked out of the room and slapped Lu Ye's hand away. She then shielded Yi behind her. Chapter 408. Cultivators often fought fiercely with others. No matter how strong a cultivator's physique was, it was inevitable that they would be injured. Although injuries could be healed, many hidden dangers would remain. Hua Xi's cultivation base was still low, so she was powerless against these hidden dangers. Only a medical cultivator at the level of her second senior sister, Shui Yuan, would have the ability to treat these hidden dangers. In the past, every time Lu Yi returned to the Jade Blood Sect after training outside, Shui Yuan would carefully treat his body and remove all the hidden dangers. Now, it seemed that the spiritual mist in the heavenly fate pond also had the effect of treating hidden dangers. Lu Yi felt his body become much lighter, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. He still focused on practicing his flash. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. It was from Yu Lianzhou. Fellow Taoist Lu, I'm about to advance to the Cloud River realm. In addition, Shiguang has also advanced to the Cloud River realm. Lu Yi quickly checked the spirit stream list. Sure enough, he didn't see Shiguang's name. It seemed as Yu Lianzhou had said, Shiguang had advanced to the Cloud River realm. Not only that, but many familiar names had disappeared from the spirit stream list, and a large number of unfamiliar names had appeared at the bottom of the list. The spirit stream list changed quickly. Under normal circumstances, a new batch of people would be completely replaced in a few months. No matter how high one's rank was, as long as one entered the heavenly fate pond 3 or 4 times, they would reach their limit. Thus, there was no point in staying in the Heaven 9 realm any longer. As for the Eliminating Leaves Alliance that Yu Lianzhou had mentioned, Lu Yi had heard about it. He knew that it was a temporary organization formed by the Myriad Devil Ridge to eliminate him. Shiguang was the leader. It was originally a temporary and loose organization. Now that Shiguang, the leader, had run away, wouldn't the Eliminating Leaves Alliance be like a group of dragons without a leader? He sent a message to Yu Lianzhou, telling him to take care. A moment later, Yu Lianzhou's name disappeared from the spirit stream list. Outside the wooden house, Lu Yi was still focused on practicing his blade technique. When he was tired, he would cultivate and read some books. When he recovered, he would continue practicing the Jade Blood Circle. Boundless Island Station. Boundless Island was a first-grade sect with a deep foundation and a large number of talented people. At that moment, a young man was standing in a secluded area, quietly looking at an exquisite pavilion not far away. If Lu Yi were here, he would definitely recognize this young man. He was none other than Luo Ji, whom he had fought before. However, at that time, everyone's cultivation was not high. By the way, I forgot to congratulate Senior Brother for entering the top 20 of the Spirit Stream list. Kong Bu smiled bitterly and shook his head. I don't deserve to be in the top 20. Recently, many people in front of him had chosen to break through to the Cloud River realm, so his ranking had naturally risen as well. In the wooden house in the Myriad Poisons Forest, Lu Yi had only been living leisurely for 3 days when he received a message from Fengyu. Fifth Senior Brother, it's not good. Many people from the Myriad Demons Ridge have surrounded the 3 Sacred Academies encampment. They seem to be targeting you. Lu Yi was puzzled. Targeting me? Why would they go to the 3 Sacred Academies encampment? Fengyu replied, they couldn't find you, so they came looking for me. I don't know how they found out I was a disciple of the Blue Blood sect. Fifth Senior Brother, what should we do? Lu Yi replied and hurriedly sent a message to someone else to inquire about the situation. Soon he received some feedback. During this time, he had been hiding in the Myriad Poisons Forest, and the myriad demons Ridge had completely lost track of him. Now that he had reached the top of the spirit stream list and received a baptism from Heaven's secret, the myriad demons Ridge could not bear it any longer. Lu Ye was already difficult to kill, and if he continued to grow stronger, no one in the spirit stream battlefield would be able to kill him. Therefore, the myriad demons Ridge was now thinking of ways to force him out. As for the fact that Feng Yu was a disciple of the Blue Blood sect, no one had deliberately leaked the news. When Lu Yi had first entered the core circle, he had brought Feng Yu to the 3 Sacred Academies encampment and left her there. Those who were observant would naturally realize this. Not only had the 3 Sacred Academies encampment been surrounded, but even the Pill Heart sect's encampment had suffered an unexpected calamity. In the past, when Feng Yuechan and Li Baxian were in charge of the Pill Heart sect's encampment, no one had dared to provoke them. However, the myriad demons Ridge did not care whether the Blue Blood Pill Heart sect had fallen apart or not. Any sect in the core circle that had even the slightest relationship with the Blue Blood sect was targeted. For a time, the Pill Heart sect was miserable. They could not explain anything to the myriad demons Ridge, so they could only defend their encampment. Fortunately, the myriad demons Ridge only wanted to force Lu Yi out, so they only surrounded the 3 Sacred Academies and the Pill Heart sect. This was to put pressure on Lu Yi. Lu Yi did not care whether the Pill Heart sect was dead or alive, but he could not ignore the 3 Sacred Academies. His conflict with the 3 Sacred Academies had been triggered by the sect masters snatching 50 disciples from them. He had not fulfilled his promise to the 3 Sacred Academies to cultivate there. If the 3 Sacred Academies encampment was destroyed because of him, the sect master would not be able to explain himself to the 3 Sacred Academies. He had originally planned to cultivate to the 9th level in the Myriad Poisons Forest in peace, but the wind would not stop. Suppressing the anger in his heart, Lu Yi sent a message to Feng Yu. Tell the Taoists of the 3 Sacred Academies not to panic. If the encampment is destroyed because of me, I will compensate them later. Chapter 409. Guardian Sidu Han and Vice Guardian Shirlei were anxiously waiting at the 3rd Sacred Academy's encampment. After Feng Yu ended the transmission, Sidu Han hurriedly asked, Junior Marshal Sister Feng, what did fellow Taoist Lu say? Feng Yu conveyed Lu Ye's words. Sidu Han was relieved. With Lu Ye's guarantee, it didn't matter even if their encampment was breached. At most, they could retreat to their main sect in the 9 states. The Myriad Devil Ridge couldn't chase them to the 9 states. There was once a sect called the Sky Expanse sect in the inner circle. Because of Lu Yi, their encampment was breached. In the end, they followed Lu Yi and fought everywhere. Not only did they make up for their losses, but they also gained a lot of wealth. It was a blessing in disguise. Therefore, Sidu Han didn't doubt Lu Ye's ability at all. At the same time, in front of the forest of 10,000 poisons, Lu Yi took out his flying spirit tool and soared into the sky. Hoopa crouched on his shoulder. In the small courtyard, Hua Si watched him leave. This trip was different from last time. Last time, he was only going to the Tianji Business Alliance to buy some things and would be back soon. This time, he was going to cause trouble. Therefore, after some consideration, he took Hoopa and Yi with him. Hua Si also wanted to go, but Lu Yi left the mother teleportation formation in the wooden house and needed someone to stay behind. Currently, a large number of Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were surrounding the 3rd Sacred Academy's encampment in an attempt to force Lu Yi to show himself. Lu Yi wasn't stupid enough to go to the 3rd Sacred Academy. Under normal circumstances, as long as he revealed his whereabouts, the 3rd Sacred Academy's crisis would be resolved. Of course, it was also possible that the Myriad Devil Ridge would go all out and directly attack the 3rd Sacred Academy's encampment. That wasn't something Lu Yi could control. In the air, Lu Yi took out the 10,000 poisons map and checked the surroundings. He chose a Myriad Devil Ridge encampment 300 miles away from the forest of 10,000 poisons. This was a 3rd-rank sect called the Lianshan sect. After identifying the direction, Lu Yi flew straight there. After being baptized by the Tianji reward, his physique and mind were strengthened. His speed of flying spirit tool also increased by a level. An hour later, Lu Ye's figure appeared outside the Lianshan sect's encampment. Immediately, A cultivator in charge of security sensed the commotion. He rushed over and asked Lu Yi through a large formation light screen, "Fellow Taoist, who is here?" Under normal circumstances, those who came uninvited were all good friends of the sect, and they only needed to inform the sect and they would be let in. But who would have thought that a cultivator from the enemy camp would come here so brazenly, all by himself? At this moment, Lu Yi was activating the insight spirit inscriptions to enhance his eyes as he probed the nodes of the array before him. When she heard the question, she expressionlessly turned to look at the cultivator. "Who do you think I look like?" The cultivator stared blankly for a moment, then took a closer look. His face fell, and he pointed at Lu Yi. Then he activated Lu Yi. Lu Yi is? Lu Yi is. In an instant, the entire encampment was in an uproar. Streams of light soared into the sky from all directions and swept over here. Some people even had doubtful looks on their faces as they flew over, wondering if they had misheard. There had been no news of Lu Yi recently. Why would she suddenly come to their encampment? Lu Yi threw out a few formation flags and embedded them in the formation. As he did that, Lu Yi stopped the flow of spirit qi around the formation's light screen. Then he raised his hand, and as if he was lifting a curtain, he lifted a corner of the great formation and walked in leisurely. Previously, when he had brought giant armor and Feng Yu to the Elixir Heart sect, he had used this method to enter the Elixir Heart sect's encampment. Even the Elixir Heart sect, a second-grade sect's array, could not stop Lu Yi, much less the Lianshan sect. However, this method did not destroy the formation. Strictly speaking, it did not affect the formation much. It was only suitable for a single person or a group of people to sneak in. Dozens of people had already gathered around, and even more streams of light were rushing over from nearby. Lu Yi had only just stepped into the array when a barrage of attacks rained down on him. Lu Yi was prepared. He hurriedly activated the defense spirit rune to protect himself. At the same time, he activated wind travel and dashed to the side. Even so, the defense spirit rune was shattered. Lu Yi reconstructed it, and the defense spirit rune was shattered again. He broke 5 spirit runes in a row and barely escaped the fate of being attacked. The weapon casket buzzed. 9 imperial weapons flew out in streams of light. Blood splattered, followed by screams. As a third-grade sect's encampment, most of the cultivators in the encampment were Heaven 7 or Heaven 8. There were very few Heaven 9 cultivators. Even if there were, they were not strong enough to enter the spirit stream list. Such a cultivator was naturally not enough in front of Lu Yi. Fortunately, the Lianshan sect's cultivators reacted quickly. In just 10 breaths, all the cultivators in the encampment came out. In an instant, the encampment was filled with streams of light. It became very lively. Although Lu Yi had broken into their encampment alone, he knew from the beginning that he could not take over a sect's encampment by himself. He just wanted to make a big enough commotion. Cultivators from the Lianshan sect kept getting killed. Lu Yi's situation gradually became worse. Rampaging through someone's encampment seemed very impressive, but in reality, it was extremely dangerous. The slightest carelessness could lead to eternal damnation. No matter how strong the defense spirit rune was, it could not withstand the joint attacks of so many cultivators. Throughout the entire process, Lu Yi defended more than he attacked. Gradually, the Lianshan sect's cultivators stabilized their footing. They suddenly realized that this notorious thug was not invincible. In a one-on-one fight, perhaps none of them could withstand a single blow from Lu Yi. However, if all the cultivators worked together, this thug would not have an easy time. After the initial panic, the Lianshan sect's guardian envoy and deputy envoy slowly calmed down and mobilized their junior brothers and sisters to chase after Lu Yi. All kinds of arrangements were quite methodical. In less than half a cup of tea's time, Lu Yi was forced to leave the Lianshan sect's encampment. After a great battle, the Lianshan sect lost 20 to 30 people. Lu Yi was also beaten into a sorry state. However, he did not leave. Instead, he stood outside the sect's great defensive formation, swallowing spirit pills while eyeing the inside covetously. In such a situation, the Lianshan sect's cultivators did not dare to open the formation to chase after him. Inside the formation, Lu Ye's space to move was limited and he was restrained everywhere. However, if the formation was opened, Lu Yi would no longer be restrained and could do whatever he wanted. The Lianshan sect's guardian envoy and deputy envoy naturally understood this point. However, the Lianshan sect's cultivators felt extremely aggrieved to have a single person blocking their encampment like this. For a time, many Lianshan sect cultivators cursed at Lu Yi through the formation's light screen. Lu Yi did not retort. Only children would quarrel. The news of Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect appearing in the Lianshan sect's encampment and sneaking into their formation to cause a ruckus quickly spread. The nearby myriad Devil Ridge cultivators all rushed over. Although Shi Guang had advanced to the Cloud River realm, the Leaf Eradication Alliance did not disband. It was a very loose organization, created solely for the sake of killing Lu Ye. Thus, it did not matter whether Shi Guang was present or not. All they needed to do was to maintain contact with the cultivators who wanted to kill Lu Ye. More and more cultivators gathered in the Lianshan sect's encampment. After half a month of silence, the Spirit Stream battlefield became lively again. After blocking the Lianshan sect's encampment for 2 hours, Lu Yi left on his magic tool. Since he had achieved his goal, there was no need to stay any longer. At this moment, many myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were rushing toward the Lianshan sect in groups. When Lu Yi left, they bumped into each other. With Lu Ye's current strength, the average core circle cultivator would not be his match unless they formed a group of 20 to 30 people. This was not the Spirit Stream List challenge, where there were all kinds of restrictions and geographical disadvantages. In a battle in the wild, it was a competition of one's foundation and means of killing the enemy. Lu Yi did not lack either of these. He rampaged all the way, and few of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators he encountered could escape with their lives. He did not have a clear goal. In any case, he just kept moving forward and killed the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators he encountered. Since the myriad Devil Ridge wanted to force him to show up, he would do as they wished. He only hoped that the myriad Devil Ridge could bear the consequences of his appearance. After suffering many losses, many people from the myriad Demon Ridge retreated. However, more people joined in the pursuit of Lu Yi. People constantly reported Lu Ye's location. Lu Yi was very glad that he had brought Yi and Hupa. Otherwise, he would not have had time to rest. Since leaving the Lianshan sect's encampment, he had not stopped. No matter where he went, there were myriad Devil Ridge cultivators chasing after him. It was because Yi and Hupa shared the pressure that Lu Yi was able to persevere. The myriad Devil Ridge's plan was very obvious. No matter how strong Lu Ye was, there would be a limit. As long as they could drag it out until he was exhausted, they could easily kill him. It had to be said that although this method was a little stupid, it was the most effective one. Lu Yi had the talent tree and the gluttonous meal, so replenishing his spirit power was not a problem. However, if he did not rest for a long time, his mind and physical strength would not be able to hold on. Therefore, when he sensed that he was about to reach his limit, Lu Yi began to fly in the direction of the Forest of 1,000 Poisons. Now, in the core circle, the Forest of 1,000 Poisons was the only place he could go. As long as he was within 50 kilometers of the Forest of 1,000 Poisons, he could use the teleportation array to return to the wooden house. After resting in the Forest of 1,000 Poisons for a while, he could come out again to hunt the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. Lu Yi focused his mind and checked it. It was a message from Feng Yu. Fifth senior brother, the Third Sacred Academy's encampment can't be saved. I'm going back to the land of the 9 states with senior brother Situ and the others. Fifth senior brother, take care of yourself. Seeing this message, Lu Yi fell silent. The Third Sacred Academy's encampment could not be saved in the end. It made sense. It was rare for the myriad Devil Ridge to gather a large number of people outside the Third Sacred Academy's encampment. Since they had the strength to break through the encampment, they could not return empty-handed. Lu Yi sent a message but found that the message could not be transmitted. Feng Yu's imprint did not disappear, which meant that she was not dead and had returned to the land of the 9 states. If the Third Sacred Academy's encampment could not be saved, what about the Pill Heart sect? The Pill Heart sect probably would not have a good ending. In the past, the fourth senior brother and senior sister Feng were in charge, so no one dared to provoke them. Now that the fourth senior brother and senior sister Feng had both advanced to the Cloud River realm, the Pill Heart Sex cultivators of this generation were not strong. If they were really targeted, it would be difficult for them to keep their encampment. Lu Yi hurriedly urged his spiritual energy, and the figure that was originally falling diagonally down flew up again. Lu Yi, I'm afraid the magnetic field is coming. Yi's voice came from behind. With her reminder, Lu Yi finally came to her senses. Ever since he had stirred up a storm in the inner circle and led the Grand Heaven Alliance coalition army to attack the 1 to 200 sex encampments in the Myriad Devil Ridge, he had heard some rumors about the 3 disasters in the Spirit Stream battlefield. The 3 disasters of the Spirit Stream battlefield referred to the Spirit Stream Heavenly Lightning, the Protomagnetic Field, and the Falling Leaf. The Spirit Stream battlefield didn't explode with heavenly thunder for no apparent reason. However, when it did, it often signaled the arrival of an insect swarm. That was the busiest time for all of the cultivators. Regardless of which faction or sect they belonged to, all of them were fully focused on defending against the insect swarm. The protomagnetic field was another disaster. It was even more difficult to guard against than the insect swarm. Every few years or even 10 years, a protomagnetic field would appear on the Spirit Stream battlefield. Lu Yi was no stranger to the protomagnetic field. Back in the Evil Moon Valley mine, Lu Yi had relied on the protomagnetic field to kill Manager Yang as a mortal. That was how he had embarked on the path of cultivation. The protomagnetic field in the depths of the mine wasn't strong. At most, it was an invisible force field produced by the protomagnetic field. However, Manager Yang couldn't use any of his spiritual energy and was killed by Lu Yi in a daze. What if the protomagnetic field was magnified 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times? What if the protomagnetic field swept across the entire Spirit Stream battlefield? This was the truth behind the protomagnetic field of the 3 disasters. Every time this happened, the entire Spirit Stream battlefield would be filled with the protomagnetic field. The vast Spirit Stream battlefield's spiritual chi would solidify, and even the cultivators would find it difficult to use their spiritual energy. At this time, the cultivators could not even activate the spiritual energy in their bodies, let alone absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to cultivate. In the Spirit Stream battlefield, the only thing cultivators could rely on was their own bodies. For cultivators who relied on spiritual energy to fight, this was undoubtedly a great disaster. But correspondingly, this was spring for body cultivators. Weapon cultivators also had some leeway to display their abilities. As for the Dharma cultivators and ghost cultivators with weak bodies, they were generally hiding in their garrisons, trembling. The howling of the protomagnetic field had its own signs, and when the signs appeared, the entire Spirit Stream battlefield was quickly enveloped by the chaotic protomagnetic field. Now that he was the top ranker of the Spirit Stream battlefield and had received a baptism from the heavens, he had become even more powerful than before. If the Myriad Demons Ridge had too few people, they wouldn't be able to kill him. If they had too many people, they wouldn't be able to catch him. But now that their spiritual energy had been sealed, everyone could only rely on their own bodies. If they could surround Lu Yi at this time, then just a few dozen people would be able to kill him. When they understood this, the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge who had been with Lu Yi for a long time almost looked up to the sky and cheered. The heavens had opened their eyes. But soon, the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge realized a new problem. That was, Lu Yi had a mount. It was a white tiger that could use the sound of a tiger's roar to attack the enemy's mind. To be honest, when cultivators' cultivations were low, they liked to subdue and raise mounts. This was because mounts could not only be used to travel, but they were also a very good helper when fighting with enemies. However, once a cultivator reached the 8th order and was able to fly, they basically wouldn't subdue any mounts. If they could fly, why would they need a mount? Even if they subdued a mount when their cultivation was still weak, it wouldn't be able to keep up with the growth of cultivators and would gradually be eliminated. So, if they wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to kill Lu Yi, they would need to have enough mounts. At the very least, they would need to be able to keep up with others. Fortunately, there was a beast taming school. The cultivators of this school specialized in using their beasts to fight. The strength of a cultivator depended on the strength of the monster beast they controlled. When Lu Yi was challenging the rankings, he encountered a guy who brought 4 monster beasts into battle. In the end, Lu Yi killed all of them on the spot. The corpses of the monster beasts later became food for Lu Yi and Hu Po to replenish their bodies. For a time, the cultivators of the Beast Tamer School were highly sought after in the various garrisons of the Myriad Devil Ridge. Some of the demon sects even mobilized many flying demon beasts to search for Lu Yi based on his last known location. He had to find his tracks before the Origin magnetic howl ended, and then cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. At this time, Lu Yi had already arrived at Azure Emperor City Station on Hupo. Originally, it would only take half a day to travel by flying artifact, but it took him 2 days on Hupo. This was the result of Hupo's speed increasing after his strength had greatly increased. If it were before, it would have taken him 4 or 5 days to complete the journey. He was travel-worn. At Azure Emperor City Station, the defensive array had already been removed due to the magnetic field. But soon, he no longer had to think about these puzzling questions because under Yi's barrage of spells, Zhu Pang's burly body was like a canoe drifting in the middle of a stormy sea, swaying unsteadily. Lu Yi and Hu Po were also attacking from the side. Along with the shattering of another shield spirit tool, a great sense of crisis enveloped him, and the aura of death assaulted his face. Hu Po howled madly, and the soul-absorbing impact caused Zhu Pang's face to contort in pain. Blood flowed from his nostrils, and there was a vague thought in his mind that kept urging him to admit defeat. However, he couldn't concentrate, and the words that were at the tip of his tongue couldn't leave his mouth. Even more spells landed on his burly body. A sharp saber pierced through the gap in his defenses, pierced through his chin, and came out from the top of his head. The chaotic fluctuations of spiritual energy abruptly calmed down at this moment. He dispersed the technique she had condensed in her hand, and Hu Po also retreated to the side. He crouched down slightly, looking like he could explode with an attack at any time. Drip, drip, blood dripped onto the ground. Zhu Pang lowered his eyes and looked at the young man who was close to him. His eyes were filled with nostalgia and unwillingness to accept his current situation. Lu Yi pulled out his blade. Blood spurted out, and the burly figure fell to his knees with a thud. Then he slowly prostrated himself on the ground, and the ground beneath his corpse was quickly dyed red with blood. His life force dissipated. He quickly went forward and collected the spoils of war. She put the other party's damaged armor into her storage pouch, then tossed the storage pouch to Lu Yi. Only then did she flash back into Hu Po's body. At this time, Lu Yi had already taken out many bandages and healing pills from his storage pouch. He also took out a bundle, wrapped it up, and tied it to Hu Po's back. Accepting Zhu Pang's challenge was just the beginning. If his predictions were correct, he would probably have to kill his way out. Under the howling of the magnetic field, spiritual energy was completely sealed, and there was no way to open his storage pouch. Naturally, these healing items had to be prepared first. Not only that, Lu Yi also specially found a few sabers that were similar in shape to the mountain saber from the many spoils of war. When everything was ready, Lu Yi stuffed a few healing pills into his mouth, then turned around and rode on Hu Po's back. Only then did he allow Tianji to teleport him out of the arena. When he returned, it was still that boundless plain. Just as his vision recovered, a strong gust of wind attacked from the side, ruthlessly slamming into Hu Po. Even with Hu Po's strength, he staggered a little from the impact. An angry tiger roar rang out, and a tiger claw slammed down in the direction of the attack. In an instant, Lu Yi understood the intentions of the Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators. They had deliberately flaunted their strength in order to lure him to take a detour. If he chose to do so, he would fall into their trap. This was because no matter which direction he took, there would always be such traps. Fortunately, Hu Po's reaction speed was extremely fast. The moment he sensed that something was wrong beneath his feet, he leaped high into the air. With a crash, A few well-hidden figures suddenly emerged from the flat ground in front of them. At the same time that those people appeared, a row of barricades suddenly appeared on the flat ground. The sharp spikes were slanted in the direction of Hupo's jump. Not only that, but further behind, 6 people also leaped into the air and pulled out a large net to cover the front. The myriad devil ridge's careful deployment was beginning to show. Now that Hupo was in midair, he had nowhere to borrow strength. If he were to fall directly, he would definitely crash into the sharp barricades. No matter how tough Hupo's skin was, he would definitely be injured if he crashed into them. If he was not careful, he might even be pierced through. A tiger's roar shook the sky. Hupo had obviously sensed the danger, but he was powerless to change anything. Although he was psychic and knew human nature, he was only a demonic beast after all. How could he understand the treachery of human nature? Seeing that Hupo's body was beginning to fall, the eyes of the group of myriad devil ridge cultivators shone with anticipation. At this moment, Lu Yi suddenly flipped down from Hupo's back and grabbed one of Hupo's big ears. While he was in midair, he forcefully twisted his body, and with the help of the spinning force, he forcefully flung Hupo away, changing Hupo's landing spot. Meanwhile, he himself was crashing towards the barricades. In an instant he was right in front of Hupo. Lu Ye's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He grabbed a sharp thorn and pressed his palm against it, leaping over the sharp obstacle. When he landed, he slid several feet away before he could stabilize himself. Roar! Hupo roared angrily. When he landed heavily, a large net was already covering his head. The large net pulled out by the myriad devil ridge cultivators was originally aimed at Lu Yi. However, Lu Ye's movements were more agile than Hupo's, so they couldn't target him. They could only settle for the next best thing, which was to cover Hupo first. Lu Yi had just stabilized himself when he was surrounded by the myriad devil ridge cultivators. There were also the 30 or so cultivators he saw earlier, and they were all rushing over. Hupo was roaring angrily, trying to break free from the large net. If it was an ordinary object, Hupo could easily tear it apart with his powerful strength. However, the large net was obviously a spiritual weapon. Just as he finished speaking, Lu Yi charged toward them again. Kill. The body cultivator who had shouted earlier roared and was the first to meet Lu Yi, brazenly and fearless. However, when the machete slashed down, the body cultivator's head flew high into the air. After another round of killing, Lu Ye's body was covered in more and more wounds. His body was covered in blood, both his own and the enemy's. Along the way, nearly 10 myriad devil ridge cultivators lay dead. This time, Lu Yi didn't stop. Instead, he charged toward Hupo. Although he had the ability to kill everyone here, if he really did so, he wouldn't have an easy time. The injuries that the myriad devil ridge cultivators left on his body weren't serious, but there were too many of them. Almost every time he killed someone, there would be a few more wounds on his body. In order to return to the myriad poison forest as soon as possible and to prevent being surrounded by the myriad devil ridge people, Hupo almost didn't stop for a rest. At the end of the run, Hupo's entire body was emitting white mist. After a full 3 days, the myriad poison forest was in sight. At this point, the myriad devil ridge had also noticed Lu Ye's intentions. Although they didn't know how this guy had survived in the myriad devil ridge the last time, he was obviously going to use the same trick again and enter the myriad poison forest. If he really rushed into the myriad poisons forest, then this operation would end in failure again. Therefore, no matter what, they couldn't let Lu Ye enter the myriad poison forest again. With the convenience of flying monsters, the myriad devil ridge's side transported people back and forth in an extremely short period of time. By the time Lu Yi rode Hupo to the edge of the myriad poison forest, there were already close to 200 cultivators who had formed a dense defensive line. White mist rose from Hupo's body and its running body slowly came to a stop. Its beast eyes looked at the densely packed enemies in front of it, and it let out a low, threatening growl. On Hupo's back, Lu Yi sighed softly. If he could use his spirit power, he was confident that he could charge through and kill more than 200 enemies by himself. At the very least, if he couldn't win, he could use wind walk or flight wings to escape. However, under the restriction of spirit power, he couldn't kill his way through no matter what. This was especially true after 3 days of fleeing and fighting. Both he and Hupo were exhausted. Lu Yi! An angry roar came from the other side. Come and fight. Although it wasn't a glorious thing to bully someone with numbers, thinking back to Lu Yi's campaign until now, there were probably thousands of myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who had died at his hands. Therefore, to the myriad Devil Ridge, as long as they could kill Lu Yi, it didn't matter whether it was glorious or not. No one cared. If he lived, there would only be more myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who would suffer in the future. Hoopa paced back and forth. Lu Yi raised his hand and tapped on his battlefield imprint, sending out a message. I might not be able to come back for a while. I have to circle around and see if I can enter from another direction. The chances were slim. If he could circle around, so could the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. As long as the myriad Devil Ridge had their eyes on him, he wouldn't be able to kill his way into the myriad poison forest. However, in this huge spirit stream battlefield, aside from the myriad poison forest, the only place he could go was the Jade Blood Sect's encampment. Xiao Hui was overseeing the encampment. An Overlord-grade flying demonic beast was very frightening, so the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators wouldn't dare to act rashly. They could only watch as Lu Yi continuously approached the myriad poisons forest until he rushed into it and disappeared without a trace. The myriad Devil Ridge's operation to kill Lu Yi had once again ended in failure. Last time, he had escaped into the myriad poisons forest, and this time, he had escaped into the myriad poisons forest again. History seemed to be repeating itself. The difference was that last time, he had relied on a bizarre method to directly kill his way into the myriad poisons forest. This time, however, his luck was off the charts. For some reason, the poisonous creatures in the myriad poisons forest had gone berserk, completely destroying the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators' formation. However, was it really just good luck? Some people couldn't help but wonder if the poisonous creature's rampage had something to do with Lu Yi. However, no matter how they thought about it, they couldn't think of anything. At that time, Lu Yi had been a few hundred feet away from the myriad poisons forest. Other than riding on the tiger's back, he hadn't done anything else. Even if he really had some method to control the poisonous creatures, he couldn't have used it out of thin air. However, it was too much of a coincidence to say that it had nothing to do with him. Also, how did Lu Yi manage to stay in the myriad poisons forest for dozens of days without being poisoned to death? The last time he had been trapped in the myriad poisons forest, the myriad Devil Ridge had been looking forward to the day he would be poisoned to death. However, this time, no one was looking forward to anything. In the myriad poisons forest, Lu Yi hadn't rushed far on Hupo when he saw a familiar figure standing there and waving at him. Who else could it be but Hua Xiai? Hupa stepped forward, and Lu Yi pulled Hua Xiai onto his back. Hua Xi's expression froze. Is it serious? Whether it was Lu Yi or Hupa, they both looked like they were riddled with wounds, especially Lu Yi. His naked upper body was covered in wounds, and his pants were stained red with blood. They're all superficial wounds. Hua Xiai breathed a sigh of relief. After traveling for an hour, they finally returned to the wooden house. Originally, the wooden house was covered by a large formation. Under the cover of the formation, as long as there was enough spiritual power to support it, the poisonous fog outside would not be able to invade. Lu Yi had even left behind a mother teleportation formation in the courtyard. However, the spiritual power of heaven and earth had been sealed, and the large formation had stopped working long ago. Without the formation, the poisonous fog would invade. Lu Yi had the talent tree. As long as there was enough fuel stored in the talent tree, he would be immune to all kinds of poisons. However, Hupa didn't have that ability. He couldn't ask Hua Xiai to stay by his side and cure his poison. Hupa can't transform, right? Hua Xiai asked. His hands were clenched into fists, palms facing upwards. The Pan Mountain saber was in his hands. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, feeling the long saber in his hand as he breathed. This was a way of cultivation. A spirit weapon had a spirit, especially a spirit weapon that had accompanied its master in battle and killed enemies for a long time. It was no longer just a spirit weapon, but a partner that its master could entrust his life to. Using this special method of cultivation, Lu Yi was able to form a miraculous connection with the Pan Mountain saber. This was the so-called man and saber connection. That was what was written in Third Senior Brother's saber technique notes. However, Lu Yi had always felt that this matter was somewhat unfathomable. After all, spirit artifacts were inanimate objects. How could they have any sort of resonance with him? Lu Yi decided to give it a try. He planned to cultivate like this for a few days and see the results. If it really didn't work, he would find an opportunity to ask his third senior brother for advice. The Pan Mountain saber undoubtedly met his requirements. Since Lu Yi embarked on the path of cultivation, he had only used a total of 3 spirit artifacts. One was Manager Yang's sword, and the other was the saber he obtained from killing enemies in Clear Cloud Mountain. That saber had a similar appearance to the Pan Mountain saber, but its grade was too low and had been destroyed in the Battle of Golden Light Peak. After the Battle of Golden Light Peak, Lu Yi bought the Pan Mountain saber from the Tianji treasure house. At that time, he was only a 5th-order cultivator. Today, this long saber had been with him for more than a year and had killed countless enemies. It could be said that this saber was extremely convenient for Lu Yi. Even if his cultivation increased in the future and he had to change to a higher-grade spirit artifact, he was prepared to buy a similar long saber. Inside the wooden house, Lu Ye's chest rose and fell as he breathed in and out. At first, he didn't feel anything special, but as time passed, Lu Yi actually had a subtle feeling that the Pan Mountain saber in his hand was breathing in and out with his breathing. At first, this feeling was very weak, but gradually, it became stronger. The long saber seemed to have a life of its own. Until a certain moment, a cold light flashed in the dim wooden house, accompanied by the sound of the saber being unsheathed. Lu Yi was suddenly awakened. Looking down, he had unsheathed the Pan Mountain saber at some point. At this moment, the Pan Mountain saber gave him a different feeling. It was no longer an inanimate object used to kill enemies. Holding the saber's hilt, Lu Yi felt as if it was an extension of his body. Pulling out the Pan Mountain saber, Lu Yi casually swung it a few times. It was smoother than before. Like an extension of his arm. Yes, this was the feeling. Was this the so-called man and saber in harmony? Lu Yi clicked his tongue in amazement. He didn't expect that what his third senior brother had said in the saber technique was true. He had originally only wanted to try his hand at cultivating, but in the end, he had achieved it so easily. Although his cultivation didn't increase, nor did he open any spirit apertures, Lu Yi knew that he had taken a big step forward on the path of saber technique. There seemed to be something else. Lu Yi muttered to himself for a moment, then returned the saber to its sheath. Closing his eyes, he casually threw the Pan Mountain saber far away and breathed in and out. Because he had thrown the Pan Mountain saber with his eyes closed, he didn't know where it was. But even with his eyes closed, he could vaguely sense the saber's existence. He stood up and walked forward step by step. After taking 7 steps, he bent his waist and reached out with his hand. The Pan Mountain saber was in his hand. The first step of saber technique cultivation had been completed. Lu Yi originally thought that not much time had passed, but when he felt the hunger in his stomach and asked Hua Si, he found out that 3 days had passed in the blink of an eye. Lu Yi almost suspected that this woman was lying to him because he hadn't noticed the passage of time at all. But after asking others, he found out that Hua Si hadn't lied to him. 3 days had really passed. Perhaps Lu Ye's distrust had caused Hua Si to become angry, but she had prepared a table full of terrifying-looking food for him. Under Hua Si's smiling gaze, Lu Yi had no choice but to bite the bullet and finish everything on the table. Hupa looked at him with sympathy. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Lu Yi returned to the 3rd floor and sat down cross-legged. Holding the Pan Mountain saber with both hands, he closed his eyes and breathed in and out. After attaining the connection between man and saber, it didn't mean that he could sit back and relax. Instead, he had to use this method to deepen his connection with his saber. The deeper the connection between man and saber, the more powerful the saber's killing power would be. Lu Yi decided that if he had the chance in the future, he would spend 2 hours every day doing this kind of cultivation. In any case, he didn't need to breathe on his own when cultivating, so he could use it in this aspect. 2 hours later, Lu Yi walked down from the 3rd floor and arrived at the small courtyard outside the house. Hua Xiai was nowhere to be seen. This woman must have hidden somewhere to cultivate. Lu Yi was actually curious about her cultivation method. Ever since she came to the Myriad Poisons Forest, her cultivation had advanced at lightning speed. Now, Lu Yi suspected that she wasn't far from reaching the 9th heaven. Standing in the small courtyard, Lu Yi took out his mountain pan saber and held it in his right hand, assuming a stance. Following the guidance of 3rd Senior Brother's saber technique insights, Lu Ye's blood and qi surged. Following his will, a huge amount of blood and qi gathered in his right arm that held the saber, then he slashed down. He couldn't use the spiritual power in his body, so the power of this slash couldn't be considered strong. However, Lu Yi could clearly feel that this slash was faster and stronger than his normal slash. So that's how it is. He had been unable to perfect the flash saber technique before because he always felt that something was missing. After reading 3rd Senior Brother's insights, he finally understood what he was missing. What he lacked was the ability to use the power of his blood and qi. Previously, when he swung the saber, he relied on his own strength and spiritual power to infuse the spirit tool. The former was the capital brought by his physique, while the latter was instinct. This was because cultivators relied on their own spiritual power to fight with their enemies. A cultivator without spiritual power was an ordinary person with a stronger physique. Only now did Lu Yi realize that he had overlooked a very important problem. He relied too heavily on his spiritual power and neglected the power of his body. If the power contained in the flash saber technique was 10 points, then spiritual power would take up at least 80% of it. His own strength would only take up 20% or even 10%. There was no way to achieve a balance, so the flash saber technique was incomplete. Because the power of the slash wasn't enough, he couldn't control it. If he could use 40% or even 50% of his strength, then the flash saber technique would be perfect. The explosive power would also increase explosively. How could he use his own strength more effectively? Blood transference. The source of strength was blood and qi. Therefore, body cultivators were generally stronger than cultivators of other factions because their blood and qi were abundant. Why was Lu Yi stronger than ordinary body cultivators? Because his blood and qi were more abundant than ordinary body cultivators. But now, he had a mountain of treasures, but he didn't know how to use it. He had wasted a huge amount of his blood and qi. The blood transference technique was to solve this problem. It had to be said that 3rd Senior Brother had imperceptibly helped Lu Yi a lot by sending his saber technique cultivation notes. Moreover, now was the best time to cultivate the blood transference technique. Because the magnetic field was in chaos and the world's spiritual energy was confined, even the spiritual power in a cultivator's body couldn't flow. Lu Yi could only rely on his own blood and qi. In such an environment, he could better and more directly feel the flow of his blood and qi. Immersing his mind, he tried to concentrate his blood and qi on his saber-wielding right arm. In a short moment, his entire right arm turned red and the temperature of his right arm rose. Only when Lu Yi felt that he couldn't continue did he slash out. Suddenly, a blood-red blade flashed. It wasn't a sign of spiritual power, but a sign of blood and qi bursting out. The power of this slash was at least 50% stronger than the previous slash. Chapter 418. Lu Ye's right arm, which was holding the knife, became sore and swollen. The skin of his entire right arm was like a roasted shrimp shell, incomparably red and steaming. His entire right arm was sore, swollen, and trembling uncontrollably. Lu Yi clenched his fist, and repeated this process many times before his right arm slowly recovered. Recalling the saber strike just now, Lu Yi felt as if the dark clouds had parted to reveal the bright moon. For a long time, his cultivation had relied on his own efforts and fumbling. He did not know what was right or wrong. His 3rd Senior Brother's saber cultivation experience had undoubtedly pointed out a clear path for him. After a cup of tea's time, Lu Yi felt that his right arm had completely recovered, so he slashed out again just like before. 4 to 6 hours later, Lu Yi switched the saber in his right hand to the saber in his left and continued to practice. Saber after saber, he hacked down meticulously. At night, when Hua Xi returned from her cultivation outside, she saw Lu Yi standing in the courtyard, his arms hanging down naturally. The Pan Mountain blade was stabbed into the ground by his feet. Their eyes met, and Lu Yi whispered, "Help!" Hua Xi took a closer look and saw that his arms were swollen to the size of his thighs. She was shocked. Zhang Xian hurriedly rushed forward to check on Lu Yi, and after confirming that it was just a blood clot and nothing serious, he finally relaxed. He then asked Lu Yi the reason why he was in such a wretched state, and upon learning that the latter had caused him to be in such a sorry state in order to cultivate his saber arts, he felt helpless. Because she had gathered too much qi and blood and didn't disperse it in time, causing her arms to swell, it wasn't a big problem. After being patted and rubbed by Hua Xi to stimulate blood circulation, Lu Ye's arms returned to normal in just one night. It was the same the next day. However, after suffering a loss, Lu Yi would pay more attention when practicing his saber art. Therefore, the situation was better than the first day. In the following days, Lu Yi cultivated his saber skills during the day and had Hua Xi treat him at night. As his saber skills improved day by day, the aftereffects of using the blood transfer technique also decreased. One day, as Hua Xi was treating Lu Ye's arms, she suddenly asked, "Haven't you been paying attention to the spirit stream list lately?" "No, what?" Previously, he had been paying attention to the spirit stream list, but since he had become the spirit stream list number 1, he did not pay much attention to it, as there were very few people who could threaten his position on the list. Take a look. Lu Ye's mind was connected to the spirit stream list. From the top, there were some changes on the list, some familiar names, some names that had disappeared. By the looks of it, they had all advanced to the Cloud River. Lu Yi continued to look down, and when he reached the 70th rank, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. This was because only a few of the 30 people ranked between 40th and 70th were from Haotian Alliance. The rest were all from Myriad Devil Ridge. This situation seemed familiar. Loses spirit streams s, Yez's lose ss Lu Yez's lose li, s name thunzi. Lu ling lu li time, spirit lu li lu li. Did you see that? Hua Xi asked. When did she start to make the list? Yesterday. Lu Yi was surprised. In just one day he had reached the 38th position on the spirit stream list. This speed was not the least bit inferior to his previous record. In fact, it was even faster. That person should be very strong. Be careful. There's a high chance that he's targeting you. Hua Xi reminded. Boundless Island. Lu Yi fell into deep thought. He seemed to have had some dealings with someone from this force. If he remembered correctly, Luo Ji, whom he had met in the sky-splitting gorge, was from the Boundless Island. As expected of a first-grade sect, they had a solid foundation. Putting aside Luo Ji, who practiced a heaven-class cultivation technique, Lan Zi, who suddenly popped out of nowhere. Hua Xi had said that there was a high chance that this person was targeting him, and it was not without reason. In the past, the Myriad Devil Ridge had repeatedly targeted him, and the various powers had tried to surround and kill him. However, they had failed each time. Now that he was hiding in the Myriad Poisons forest, the Myriad Devil Ridge was powerless to do anything to him. If they wanted to kill him, they would have to challenge him through the Spirit Stream list. However, Lu Ye's strength at the top of the Spirit Stream ranking was not just for show. Almost all of the mighty ones from the Myriad Demons Ridge who were on the Spirit Stream ranking had been killed by him. Even a mighty one like Shi Guang was no match for Lu Yi. Perhaps only the dead Yan Xing had the qualifications to defeat Lu Yi. At this juncture, Lan Zi had suddenly appeared on the Myriad Devil Ridge's side. This woman's method of ranking was exactly the same as Lu Ye's. She had challenged the experts of the Grand Heaven Alliance who were ranked above her one by one. The Grand Heaven Alliance had no power to fight back. In just one day she had reached the 38th position. While Lu Yi and Hua Xi were talking, Lan Zi's ranking jumped up by 2 places, occupying the 36th position. The name of the person who had been in the 36th position suddenly disappeared without a trace. Obviously, he had died in battle. Imitating Lu Ye's method of ranking, and choosing such a subtle time, no one would believe that she was not targeting Lu Yi. There are still 7 or 8 days before the Tianji bestowment, right? Hua Xi asked again. Lu Yi calculated and nodded. 7 days. It had been 23 days since the Tianji bestowment's baptism. Every time he experienced the Tianji bestowment's baptism, Lu Ye's strength would increase significantly. Therefore, if this Lan Zi was really targeting him, she would definitely challenge Lu Yi before the Tianji bestowment's baptism. She would definitely not give him a chance to continue growing stronger. Judging by the speed at which this woman was climbing the rankings, she would most likely have the qualifications to challenge Lu Yi in the next 2 days. Lu Yi was suddenly looking forward to it. This was because he could not find an opponent to test his strength in the entire Spirit Stream battlefield. It was easy for him to fight. As long as he left the forest of 1,000 poisons and exposed his whereabouts, countless myriad Devil Ridge cultivators would flock over. However, that would definitely be a situation where many cultivators would gang up on him. However, it would be difficult for him to fight one-on-one. The best way to test one's strength was to fight a powerful cultivator one-on-one. Since this Lan Zi could climb the rankings so quickly, her strength was definitely not weak. Lu Yi had been cultivating his saber techniques recently and had gained quite a bit of insight. However, cultivation was still only cultivation. The results of cultivation still depended on one's performance in actual combat. If this Lan Zi was really strong enough, she would be a very good whetstone. At this time, the rising star, Lan Zi, had attracted the attention of countless cultivators from both sides. Before Lu Ye's sudden appearance, no one had ever killed so many opponents while challenging the Spirit Stream rankings. Moreover, the way he climbed the rankings was to challenge them one by one. This undoubtedly annoyed the myriad Devil Ridge. However, this woman had been unstoppable all the way to the top of the Spirit Stream rankings. Many of the myriad Devil Ridge's actions against her had all ended in failure. Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect had become a huge mountain that pressed down on the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators, making it difficult for them to breathe. However, a similar talent had appeared on the myriad Devil Ridge's side today. The speed at which she climbed the rankings was not slower than Lu Yi's. In fact, she was even faster. Many Grand Sky Alliance cultivators had died at her hands. Everyone was waiting. They were waiting for Lan Zi to have the qualifications to challenge the top of the Spirit Stream rankings. They were waiting for the two of them to fight it out and see who was the strongest cultivator in the current generation of the Spirit Stream realm. In the small courtyard outside the wooden house, Lu Yi was still cultivating his saber techniques. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. Lu Yi looked down and found that it was a message from Han Taijun. Be careful of that woman. She's very strong. She has a lot of flowers. Lu Yi understood that she was very strong. Lan Zi's speed on the leaderboard was very fast, so Lu Yi had never underestimated her. But a lot of flowers? What did that mean? Moreover, judging from Han Tiejuan's words, it seemed that he had already fought with Lan Zi. Lu Yi checked the Spirit Stream rankings. Sure enough, Han Taijun was originally ranked 3rd, but now he had run to 5th place. Lan Zi had taken his 3rd place. Are you okay? Lu Yi asked. I'm heavily injured. Amazing. I'm heavily injured. Anyway, you have to be careful of that woman. She might not be weaker than you. I couldn't force her to use her full strength. From the beginning to the end, I felt that she was just playing a game when fighting me. Understood. After ending the conversation with Han Taijun, Lu Yi thought for a moment and sent a message to Hua Xi. He did not cultivate his saber techniques anymore. Although after these days of cultivation, his arms would not swell like on the first day. However, this kind of cultivation consumed a lot of his physical strength. He did not know when Lan Zi would come to challenge him, so he had to maintain his condition. Hua Xi quickly returned and helped him adjust his arms. Lu Yi returned to the 3rd floor and sat down cross-legged. He swallowed a few spirit pills, then placed the mountain saber on his knees and slowly breathed in and out. Lan Zi had already rushed to the 3rd place on the Spirit Stream rankings. The highly anticipated battle was about to begin. At this moment, Both the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance and the Myriad Devil Ridge were paying attention to the Spirit Stream rankings. They wanted to know who was the strongest cultivator on their side. Lu Yi and Lan Zi's battle hadn't even started yet, and all sorts of information were already flying around. The Myriad Devil Ridge's side clamored that Lu Yi had already been baptized by the heavens, so this battle was not fair to Lan Zi. The Grand Heaven Alliance's side immediately retorted. Lan Zi's cultivation was at the 9th heaven, while Lu Ye's was only at the 8th heaven. It was indeed unfair. After these words were spread, the Myriad Devil Ridge's side was immediately silenced. They suddenly realized a terrifying fact: that Lu Yi was still at the 8th heaven. Therefore, even if he lost this battle, it could not prove that Lan Zi was the strongest in the Spirit Stream realm. That was because Lu Yi could still advance to the 9th heaven and have a chance to make a comeback. On the other hand, if Lan Zi lost, it would be a true loss. If the 9th heaven could not beat the 8th heaven, then when Lu Yi advanced to the 9th heaven, would he still be a match? Therefore, there was only one chance. If Lan Zi could not reach the top of the Spirit Stream rankings this time, then he would forever be suppressed by Lu Yi. Just as the information was flying around in the outside world, Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes in the wooden house. Chapter 419. Within the wooden hut, Lu Yi accepted the challenge and chose the location of the arena. Suddenly, a heavenly will descended, and the two of them quickly disappeared. Once again, the arena was only a few dozen meters in radius. Lu Yi steadied himself and waited for the white light in his field of vision to dissipate before looking at his opponent. On the other side of the arena, a tall woman dressed in purple stood there silently. Her appearance was undoubtedly very beautiful, and her figure was also excellent. Her entire person exuded a tranquil and elegant aura. This woman's name was Lan Zi, and she was dressed in purple, which was quite fitting. Lu Yi looked down and raised his eyebrows imperceptibly. He was sizing up his opponent, and she was sizing him up as well. As the strongest cultivators from both sides, it wasn't that they were friends, but rather, it was an instinct to observe one's opponent before a battle. Lan Zi didn't seem to have any spirit tools on her. Lu Yi wondered if she was a spell cultivator. However, based on her attire, that didn't seem to be the case. Regardless of whether she was or not, he would know once he gave it a try. The weapon box at his waist buzzed, and 9 streaks of light shot towards Lan Zi like ferocious tigers. In the blink of an eye, they had covered more than half of the distance between them. Lan Zi raised her hand and pointed forward. A streak of pure spiritual energy shot out in the form of a spiritual energy thread. This wasn't a spell technique, but rather a precise control of one's spiritual energy. However, its power wasn't inferior to any spell technique. What was even more surprising was that after this line of spiritual energy flew out, it suddenly split into 9 and attacked 9 streams of light. A series of clanging sounds rang out as Lu Ye's 9 imperial tools were all blocked. Not only that, but even more streaks of spiritual energy shot out from the other side, one after another. Some of the streaks of spiritual energy didn't change, while others suddenly split. In an instant, the space in front of Lu Yi was covered by countless streaks of spiritual energy, forming a large net that descended towards him. This net of spiritual energy sealed the heavens and locked down the earth, making it impossible for Lu Yi to dodge. He unsheathed his mountain plate saber and slashed forward. A fiery red streak of light flashed past, and a hole appeared in the net of spiritual energy surrounding Lu Yi. Lu Yi shot out like an arrow towards Lan Zi. His opponent seemed to be a magic cultivator, so Lu Yi naturally wanted to fight her in close combat. Only then could he display his advantage. However, Lu Yi had just rushed out when he heard a clear and melodious clanging sound. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen streaks of light had already shot towards him. Those streaks of light were all flying swords. A Dharma cultivator driving a flying sword? This was not common. Lu Yi was not alarmed. Under the control of his mind, the 9 imperial equipment around him welcomed the flying swords. At the same time, his footsteps did not stop as he continued to charge forward. Clanking sounds could be heard as the imperial equipment of both sides clashed in midair, sparks flying everywhere. In the blink of an eye, Lu Yi was already 30 meters away from Lan Zi. His Pan Mountain blade was wrapped in flames, and his killing intent was bursting out. Lan Zi, who was standing still, raised her hand and grabbed at the air. A huge sword appeared in her hand. Lu Yi did not even see how the sword appeared. This was a two-handed greatsword. It was much wider and heavier than a normal longsword. Being held in the hands of a woman like Lan Zi would undoubtedly create a strong visual impact. She gripped the hilt of her sword with both hands and faced Lu Ye's slash with her sword. Boom! Waves of air swept across the battlefield. In the instant that spiritual energy went berserk, Lu Ye's body shook and stabilized. On the other side, Lan Zi also slightly arched her body and did not retreat a single step. This surprised Lu Yi, because there had never been a spirit stream realm cultivator who could take one of his attacks without retreating. Even a physique cultivator of the Nine Heavens realm would find it difficult to do so. However, such a beautiful and tall woman was able to do it. This woman was definitely not a Dharma cultivator. What made Lu Yi even more concerned was that this woman had a faint smile on her face from the beginning to the end. Her silent demeanor gave off a sense of superiority. Han Taijun was right. This woman had a lot of tricks up her sleeves. Moreover, she was facing the battle with a playful attitude. The two of them were in a deadlock at close range. The distance between them was less than 10 meters. Their eyes met, and the red and blue spiritual energy clashed fiercely under their respective control. Normally, in this situation, it was time for the Sunshine Spirit Rune to appear. The Pan Mountain Saber flashed with a dazzling light. At the same time, Lu Yi suddenly felt an irresistible force in front of him. Under the push of that violent force, he actually floated back several meters. At the same time, Lan Zi took advantage of the momentum to retreat and closed her eyes tightly. Ding ding dang dang. Around the two of them, the Imperial equipment and flying sword were still constantly clashing. Even when the saber and sword clashed, the confrontation did not stop. This was undoubtedly a great test of a person's mind. Lu Ye's mind was strong because his divine soul had been cleansed in the soul cleansing pool, and then he had taken a lot of soul cleansing water. However, the strength of Lan Zi's mind was not inferior to Lu Ye's. This was somewhat inconceivable. Just as the two of them were retreating, a flying sword broke through the blockade of Lu Ye's Imperial equipment and silently slashed at him. Before Lu Yi landed on the ground, he didn't even look and swung his saber. The powerful destructive force made the flying sword dim, and it flew directly to the edge of the battlefield. The Sunshine Spirit Rune, which had always been successful, did not work this time. Lan Zi's reaction was too fast. The moment she sensed that something was wrong, she pushed Lu Yi away and closed her eyes. When the light dissipated, the two figures charged at each other at the same time. Once again, they fiercely collided. It was as if two mountains had collided. The big sword and the long saber had different colored lights attached to them. They were entangled together, and killing intent was bursting out. Lu Ye's eyes narrowed. When he was pushed away just now, he sensed that something was wrong. This woman's strength was a little too strong. At this moment, he felt it even more clearly. Every time the saber and sword clashed, the arm holding the saber trembled slightly, and the web between his thumb and forefinger gradually became numb. He was simply in disbelief. In a competition of strength, he actually lost to a woman. Looking at her chi and blood, it was not to an outrageous extent. How could she erupt with such powerful strength? During the confrontation, Lu Yi thought of a possibility and immediately constructed the Insight Spirit Rune in his eyes. Under the Insight Spirit Rune, he finally saw it clearly. In terms of chi and blood, Lan Zi was indeed inferior to him. However, this woman was clearly proficient in the blood-transferring art. Every time the big sword slashed down, she could perfectly unleash all of her strength. That was why her strength was stronger than his. This was something that Lu Yi could not achieve. Although he had practiced the blood-transferring art for a few days, he was far from being as skilled as her. If Lu Ye's strength was 100, then Lan Zi's was at most 70 or 80. However, if Lu Yi didn't use the blood transfer technique, he could only use half of his strength. If he used the blood transfer technique, he could be on par with Lan Zi, but he couldn't be as skilled as Lan Zi. On the other hand, Lan Zi could unleash all of her strength at any time. Lu Yi did not dare to use the blood-transferring art casually. The battle had just begun, and it was unwise to rashly use his trump card before figuring out the opponent's strength. The so-called trump card was something that could determine the outcome of the battle with a single strike. Although Lu Ye's strength was inferior to his opponent's, he still had spiritual tattoos that he could use. Wind travel, heavy pressure, sharp edge, and various other spiritual tattoos were activated, which caused Lan Zi to suffer a lot. For a time, the two of them were locked in battle. Hu Po wandered around the edge of the battlefield, while Yi hid underground. Neither of them participated in this battle. One spirit and one tiger knew what Lu Yi was thinking. It was rare to meet such an opponent, so he naturally wanted to fight to his heart's content and use this opportunity to train himself. Otherwise, if they all attacked together, it would be meaningless even if they won. The Imperial equipment and flying swords clashing in the sky gradually quieted down. Both Lu Yi and Lan Zi had sensed the opponent's strength. Facing such an opponent, neither of them could afford to be distracted, so they both withdrew their Imperial equipment and flying swords. Another fierce collision occurred. The heavy pressure spirit tattoo caused Lan Zi's body to shrink and almost kneel on the ground. Taking advantage of his opponent's momentary carelessness, Lu Ye's qi and blood madly gathered in his right arm. In an instant, his entire right arm swelled up, and his skin turned red. Spirit light flashed on the mountain pan saber, and double sharpness was enhanced. The flash. He got it. The saber slashed at Lan Zi's waist. With the explosive power of a flash and the enhancement of the double sharpness spirit tattoo, no one in the spirit stream realm could block this attack. The most likely outcome for Lan Zi was to be cut in half and die on the spot. However, in the next moment, Lu Yi realized something was wrong. The saber had indeed hit Lan Zi, but his opponent's body was not cut in half. The moment the saber fell, Lu Yi clearly saw a thick layer of barrier wrap around Lan Zi. The powerful force sent Lan Zi flying. His body flipped a few times in the air before landing in a sorry state. However, Lu Yi also felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. In the instant that Lan Zi was sent flying, that huge sword had pierced into his body, sinking 3 inches into his flesh. If he had not sent Lan Zi flying, that sword would have pierced right through him. When such a large sword stabbed into the body, the wounds caused by it were extremely impressive. Lu Ye's abdomen immediately spurted blood, and he staggered back. He hurriedly constructed a blood-stained spirit tattoo on his chest, and the blood that gushed out gathered under the guidance of the spirit tattoo. Standing on the spot, Lu Yi frowned and looked at the woman on the other side. He couldn't understand what kind of defense that layer of protection was. It was able to block his attack, which was enhanced by the sharpness spirit tattoo and activated the blood transfer technique. He didn't see any signs of Lan Zi activating a spirit artifact, which meant that the layer of protection was her own ability. This was troublesome. He couldn't even break the other party's defense with a flash. How was he going to kill her? On the other side, Lan Zi was half crouching, her large sword stabbed into the ground. Her feet plowed 2 lines of marks in the arena, and she barely didn't fall down.